Did Lucrezia Borgia truly transform the Vatican into a palace of vice? Did whispers of unholy relationships with her own brother, and even her father the Pope, carry truth, or were they just weapons of slander forged by enemies? The truth is far more tangled, layered with intrigue, politics, and a shadow that stretches across centuries. And before we untangle this labyrinth, let me ask you something. If a father repeatedly marries off his daughter, not for her happiness but for his own ambitions, what would you call that man? Leave your answer below. I want to hear your thoughts, even if they're sharp, even if they sting. They did not simply crown a pope in the year 1492, they released a dynasty that would make even the devil smirk. Rome was restless, the reek of burning parchment mixed with the scent of incense, rising up as bribes clinked like coins in a beggar's cup. Cardinal Rodrigo Borgia had bought his way to the papal throne. Gold spilled into the hands of cardinals, promises sworn in hushed Latin, and when the white smoke curled above St. Peter's, it was not a symbol of holiness, it was a signal fire of corruption. The man the world now called Pope Alexander VI, a Spaniard draped in a shepherd's robe but with the hunger of a wolf, claimed Christ's throne on earth, and his children would inherit not only his name but his schemes. In the shadowed halls of the Vatican, a young girl brushed strands of golden hair that soon would weigh more than silver or sapphires. At just 13, she glided through marble corridors with a radiance that seemed almost divine. Her name, Lucrezia Borgia. History would debate whether she walked the path of an angel or that of a temptress. For her father, she was neither child nor daughter. She was currency, a pawn, a jewel to be bartered in the market of politics. Alexander ruled the papal kingdom as though it were Caesar's empire. Cardinals lowered their heads in obedience, yet behind their eyes they plotted betrayal. Nobles extended smiles while their hands clutched hidden daggers. The Borgias, foreigners in Italian soil, were despised, and every feast could be their last. Alliances shifted like tides, and betrayal was as common as communion. In this ruthless game, daughters were not daughters, they were weapons. And Alexander's son, Cesare Borgia, was the sharpest blade in his arsenal. Cloaked in cardinal red but dreaming of crowns and battlefields, Cesare embodied ambition. Machiavelli would later immortalize him as the model for the prince, a man who knew morality was a burden too heavy for rulers who wanted to survive. His devotion to his father's power was absolute, and his bond with Lucrezia raised eyebrows and ignited rumors. Some would later whisper that her admiration of him blurred into something darker. But what of the girl herself? She was educated by the best minds, fluent in multiple tongues, skilled in poetry, painting, and music. Yet in Renaissance Italy, intelligence in a woman was as dangerous as her beauty. Both could be turned into weapons, both could destroy kingdoms, and Lucrezia had enough of each to make enemies tremble. In 1493, a suitor arrived. Giovanni Sforza, 26 years old, heir to a dynasty of soldiers, nephew to the Duke of Milan. He saw opportunity in wedding the Pope's daughter. Alexander saw a temporary bridge to strengthen his grip on power. Neither man realized they were signing a contract that dripped with blood. Their wedding was a spectacle of excess. Gold blazed on every surface, Latin prayers echoed across the frescoed ceilings, and guests whispered of the bride's beauty, comparing her to angels in painted glass. Yet the reality was chilling. Lucrezia was a child dressed up for display while her husband was a seasoned man of war. Their use. Neon was not about love, it was about leverage. The marriage bed, instead of being a place of intimacy, became a field of tension. Giovanni expected obedience and loyalty. Instead, he encountered a girl who navigated papal politics like a natural. Was she innocent? Or was she learning the darker lessons her father and brother taught her? The questions began to spread, whispered in courts like rats scuttling in Rome's sewers. But political winds change quickly in Italy. Within years, Alexander's eyes turned toward France, whose offers of alliances gleamed brighter than those of Milan or Naples. Giovanni Sforza suddenly represented yesterday's strategy, and yesterday's allies had a habit of becoming tomorrow's corpses. In 1497, Alexander moved to annul the marriage. To make the maneuver convincing, he declared Giovanni impotent, claiming Lucrezia's virginity remained intact for her next suitor. But Giovanni had been married before, and his first wife had died giving birth. Clearly his potency was beyond doubt. Still, who could argue with the Pope? To resist was to risk one's life. Giovanni chose another weapon: words. His revenge came in the form of accusations so vile they would echo through centuries. He declared that Lucrezia was not only her father's daughter, but also his mistress, and Cesare's too. The charge of incest fell upon Rome like thunder over dry fields. Why would he risk everything on lies, or was there some bitter truth buried in those words? He had lived within the Vatican's walls for years. He had seen the Borgias behind locked doors, shared their tables, witnessed gestures and glances when no guards were present. His claims were not random insults, they were barbs aimed precisely where they would cause the deepest wound. The nobility feasted on the scandal. To accuse Spaniards, foreigners, of polluting the holiest of bonds while occupying St. Peter's throne was too convenient to resist, whispers see. Preed faster than plague, and soon every smile, every gesture between Lucrezia and her brother, every kiss upon her father's hand was interpreted as proof of forbidden passion. Renaissance society turned innocent affection into theatre of obscenity. And yet, Lucrezia's own response was stranger still. She did not scream her innocence with the outrage expected from a slandered woman. She smiled enigmatically. She let the accusations hang in the air, unanswered. Was this the composure of someone falsely accused, or the quiet confidence of someone who knew that silence was safer than the truth? As the rumours of incest spread, new stories took root. They spoke of poison, deadly powder hidden within a hollow ring she allegedly wore. A twist of the jewel, a subtle motion at dinner, and wine would turn into death. The image was irresistible. The angel-faced daughter of the Pope, serving not bread and wine, but poison and doom. In Renaissance Italy, poison was considered a woman's weapon, silent, intimate, untraceable. A man might strike with a sword, but a woman could kill with a sip of wine, a shared embrace, a kiss. Every sudden death that touched the Borgias was attributed to Lucrezia's hand. When her brother Juan was found floating in the Tiber with stab wounds, many claimed she had poisoned him first. When cardinals opposed Alexander and died of mysterious fevers, they said it was Lucrezia's doing. The deaths mounted, but proof never came. Poison leaves no evidence, only suspicion, and suspicion was enough. By 1498, Lucrezia was married again, this time to Alfonso of Aragon, a young and handsome heir, barely 17. Unlike Giovanni, he looked at her with real affection, perhaps even love. She, in turn, revealed glimpses of tenderness, as though he might save her from the shadows of her family. For a time, their union bloomed. But love could not survive papal politics. Soon, Alfonso's connections to Naples became a liability, as Alexander pivoted alliances once more. One evening in July 1500, assassins struck Alfonso with blades, leaving him bleeding but alive. He was carried back to his rooms, where Lucrezia tended him with devotion. Yet weeks later, strangers entered his chambers and strangled him in his bed. Did Lucrezia know? Did she signal the killers? Or did she simply close her eyes and allow love to die for family loyalty? Historians still argue, but her composure at the funeral was unnerving. Tears stained her face, but she accepted condolences with the calm of someone who knew this was merely another chapter in a bloody saga. Soon after, a child appeared, a mysterious baby boy, his parentage cloaked in confusion. Official documents conflicted. One papal decree called him Alexander's son, another named Cesare. Lucrezia acknowledged him only as her half-brother, but the whispers of Rome branded him her own child. And if he was hers, who was the father? The Pope? Cesare? Or another secret lover? The child grew as a living question mark, his face bearing traces of Alexander, Cesare, and Lucrezia alike. Rome's gossip never ceased. And then came the scandal that would brand the Borgia name forever, the Banquet of Chestnuts. The Banquet of Chestnuts. Few events in history are so steeped in infamy, so wrapped in the stench of sin, that even centuries later they are whispered about with disbelief. On an October night in 1501, the Vatican itself, supposedly the holiest city in the world, was said to have been transformed into a stage for depravity. The accounts come from Johann Burchard, the papal master of ceremonies, a man whose duty was to record official events. His words survive as both accusation and testimony. According to him, Pope Alexander VI, Cesare and Lucrezia presided over a feast where 50 courtesans were invited, their bodies on display, their laughter echoing beneath frescoes of saints. The tables sagged beneath roasted meats, goblets overflowed with wine, and by night's end the women performed before the Pope himself. As chestnuts were scattered on the marble floor, the courtesans crawled after them, unclothed, while the Pope's family and guests looked on with twisted amusement. Burchard claimed prizes were awarded to the man who could perform the most acts of lust. To some, the tale was too vile to believe. To others, it was the inevitable unveiling of the corruption that already dripped from the Borgia name. Whether exaggerated or true, it burned into history as proof that Rome had fallen not to barbarians, but to its own shepherds. And at the heart of it all was Lucrezia. Was she a willing participant or merely a symbol caught in her family's theatre of sin? Enemies painted her as the hostess of vice, a Madonna turned temptress, her golden hair glowing like a halo in candlelight as she presided over corruption. But friends described her as absent, a scapegoat used by chroniclers who could not resist scandal. The truth remains veiled, tantalizing, unreachable. What cannot be denied is the impact. After the banquet, Rome's perception of Lucrezia was sealed. To the asses, she was no longer just the Pope's daughter, she was the embodiment of forbidden pleasure, a woman whose very presence meant sin, and whether she deserved it or not, that image followed her through every marriage, every rumour, every whisper of her name. But life moved on. Political games never stopped for scandal. By 1502, another marriage was arranged, this time to Alfonso d'Este, heir to the Duke of Ferrara. The Este family was no easy prize. They despised the Borgias, saw them as upstart Spaniards with bloodied hands and poisoned cups. But alliances had to be made, and Alexander's power was too vast to ignore. After bitter negotiations, Alfonso d'Este reluctantly agreed to marry Lucrezia. The wedding was not only political, it was a test. Ferrara's court expected to receive a harlot draped in papal jewels, a schemer with poisoned rings. Instead, they encountered a young woman whose grace disarmed them. Lucrezia arrived with elegance, spoke with humility, and charmed even her enemies. Her education, her taste for poetry, and her skill with languages all shone through. Slowly, suspicion gave way to admiration. In Ferrara, Lucrezia found something she had never known before: stability. Away from Rome, away from her father's schemes and her brother's shadow, she began to transform. For the first time, she was not just the pawn of the Borgias, but the Duchess of Ferrara in her own right. She founded charities, patronized artists, and surrounded herself with poets and scholars. Her court became a centre of Renaissance brilliance, where men of letters praised her not as a seductress, but as a patroness of culture. But could the past ever truly be buried? Whispers followed her like a plague. Letters from Rome still linked her to scandals, still accused her of hosting orgies, of plotting murders, of bearing children whose fathers could not be named. Every step forward she took in Ferrara was haunted by the echo of her family's sins, and yet Alfonso d'Este, her husband, began to trust her. He saw her devotion to their children, her competence in managing the duchy, her ability to soothe conflict where swords might otherwise clash. Slowly, the scandalous bride became the respected duchess. But history is cruel. It does not easily let go of the tales that entertain. Back in Rome, her family continued their bloody ascent. Cesare, no longer constrained by cardinals' robes, marched across Italy like a lion unleashed. Town after town fell under his control. His enemies were strangled, stabbed, or vanished without trace. Machiavelli, watching closely, admired him with fascination, noting how ruthlessness and cunning could build an empire. And yet even Cesare's strength had its limits. In 1503, Alexander VI died, suddenly, under mysterious circumstances. Some whispered poison, others disease, but whatever the cause, his death ripped the foundation out from beneath the Borgias. Cesare, weakened and ill at the time, could not hold his territories without the Pope's authority. Rivals rose like vultures, tearing apart what he had built. Within years, Cesare himself would be captured, betrayed, and finally killed in battle, his body left naked in the dirt. Lucrezia, however, endured. Separated from the chaos of Rome, she rebuilt herself in Ferrara. The Duchess no longer looked like the girl who once had been accused of poisoning lovers or hosting orgies in the Vatican. Instead, she became a matron of dignity, though her beauty still lingered. Her household grew with children, though not all survived the cruel hand of mortality. Still, tragedy never abandoned her. She lost children in infancy, mourned miscarriages, and endured the harsh realities of Renaissance medicine. Each loss carved lines into her face, and her golden youth faded into solemn maturity. Yet the resilience she displayed won her respect, even among those who once sneered at her name. The irony is sharp. While Rome forever remembered Lucrezia as a symbol of scandal, Ferrara honoured her as a mother, a patron, and a duchess who brought refinement to their court. In her final years, she walked with grace, dressed not as a seductress but as a ruler's wife who carried dignity in every step. In June 1519, after giving birth to her 10th child, Lucrezia Borgia succumbed to complications of childbirth. She was only 39. Her death was quiet, without poison, without scandal, without whispers of incest or orgies. Just a woman who had endured too much, carrying the weight of her family's name to the grave. And yet, centuries later, it is not her charities, her patronage, or her motherhood that echo through history. It is the scandals, the incest, the poison, the banquets, the whispers of lust within the walls of the Vatican. Whether true or false, they cling to her name like a curse. Lucrezia Borgia, the Pope's daughter, the alleged temptress of Rome, the Duchess of Ferrara, was she victim, villain, or something in between? History refuses to decide. Perhaps that is why we are still talking about her today, still fascinated, still scandalized. For in the end, scandal never dies. It outlives virtue. It becomes the story we tell, even when truth hides somewhere else, unseen, silent, waiting for us to wonder. Lucrezia's story is a mirror of her times, and her times were drenched in both glory and rot. Renaissance Italy was a stage where beauty masked violence, where paintings of angels were commissioned by men who murdered in daylight, and where saints' relics sat only a few steps away from brothels. To understand Lucrezia, one must understand the theatre she was forced to play in. Her father, Rodrigo Borgia, Pope Alexander VI, was not the first pope to sire children, but he was the first to flaunt them so openly. Papal celibacy was already a farce, whispered about in every court in Europe. But Rodrigo shattered the veil of secrecy, installing his children in positions of power, dressing them in gold and parading them as tools of papal dominance. Lucrezia was the jewel among them, not merely because of her beauty, but because a daughter could be married, annulled, and married again, each time turning into a coin to be traded in the high-stakes gambling hall of Italian politics. Every time Lucrezia smiled at a noble banquet, someone saw a dowry being negotiated. Every time her hand touched a goblet, someone suspected poison. Every time her brother stood too close, someone whispered incest. Her life was a spectacle for others, a rumor that never slept, a mask she was forced to wear. Did she ever know who she truly was beneath the layers of gossip, or did she become the role history demanded of her? The men around her defined her narrative. Giovanni Sforza, her first husband, destroyed her innocence in the court of public opinion by shouting accusations of incest. Whether he believed it or not, his claims clung to her name like a plague. Alfonso of Aragon, her second husband, gave her fleeting moments of tenderness before he was brutally strangled in the Vatican's corridors, his blood spilled for politics she could not control. Alfonso d'Este, her final husband, saw through the scandal and offered her stability, though even that could not shield her from the endless murmurs. But it was Cesare, her brother, whose shadow loomed largest. History painted them as more than siblings, bound by something darker than familial devotion. Was it true, or was it the most convenient weapon for their enemies? Cesare was ruthless, a man who believed that morality was a tool to be bent, not a chain to obey. He carved his name across Italy with blood and steel, and Lucrezia's proximity to him made her guilty by association. When he conquered towns, people said she advised him. When he killed rivals, they whispered she lured them in first. When he plotted assassinations, her name was muttered as the silent accomplice. Yet in Ferrara, she became something else entirely. Chroniclers there describe a woman of refinement, one who loved music and poetry, who softened the brutality of politics with elegance. Her court attracted writers, philosophers, and artists. She offered patronage like other noble women of her time, but with a grace that earned her respect even among those who hated the Borgias. To them she was not the Vatican's harlot. She was the duchess, the cultured hostess, the mother who wept over her children's graves. This contradiction, sinner in Rome, saint in Ferrara, is what makes her legacy so slippery. Which Lucrezia was real? Was she both, or was she neither, her image always distorted by the lens of others? And then there is the matter of the mysterious child. In 1501, a baby was born under circumstances so murky that even papal decrees could not clarify the truth. Two separate bulls from Alexander himself named two different fathers. One document called the child Alexander's son, another declared him Cesare's. Yet Lucrezia acknowledged the boy as her half-brother, an explanation that satisfied no one. The boy grew up with the title of Duke of Nepi, moving through courts as both legitimate and illegitimate, both heir and bastard. His very existence became another thread in the tapestry of scandal that cloaked Lucrezia. Could he have been her own son, born of an affair hidden beneath layers of papal lies? Or was he the child of her father or brother, a living testament to the darkest rumours? No answer survives. Only questions. By the time Alexander VI died, the Borgia dream of empire began to crumble. The Pope's body, bloated and blackened by fever or perhaps poison, was found with a grotesque smile frozen on his lips. Rome rejoiced, enemies celebrated, and Cesare scrambled to hold together what his father's gold and terror had built. Without papal power, his kingdom of ambition fell apart. Lucrezia, far from Rome, had no choice but to let go of her family's legacy. In Ferrara, she became increasingly detached from Borgia politics, focusing instead on her children, her court, and her role as duchess. But tragedy continued to follow her. Miscarriages plagued her. Infants died before they could walk. Each loss cut deeper, hollowing her spirit even as she forced herself to smile for the sake of appearances. And yet she endured, unlike Cesare, who died violently in battle. Or her father, who rotted in disgrace. Lucrezia lived long enough to see herself reshaped. From harlot to duchess, from poisoner to patroness, from incestuous temptress to grieving mother, her life contained multitudes, and each retelling chose only one face to remember. But which face is true? Was she truly the Vatican's siren, seducing cardinals and poisoning rivals at her father's command? Or was she merely a girl, trapped in a game too large for her, forced to wear the mask her enemies painted for her? Was she victim, villain, or both? The documents contradict one another. Diaries accuse her, letters defend her, poems praise her, and gossip damns her. What survives is not a woman, but a myth so powerful it outlives the truth, because history is not written for fairness. History is written for fascination. And what fascinates more than a pope's daughter accused of turning the Vatican into a brothel? By the time Lucrezia Borgia reached the later years of her life, the world she had been born into had changed drastically, and so had she. The papal courts that had once been filled with whispered accusations, poisoned goblets, and the gilded terror of her father's ambition had become a distant memory. The streets of Rome no longer echoed with the footsteps of men who had used her beauty as a tool to further their own power. The grandeur of the Vatican, once a theatre of both devotion and debauchery, no longer dictated the course of her days. In Ferrara, she found herself at the centre of a different kind of court, one that prized learning, artistry, and culture. Yet even here, the shadows of her past clung to her like a persistent mist. She was no longer merely the daughter of Pope Alexander VI, nor the sister of Cesare Borgia, whose ambition and cruelty had left scars across the Italian peninsula. She was a duchess, a patroness, a mother, a woman who had learned to navigate the treacherous waters of power with grace, resilience, and caution. Yet even as she moved through the halls of Ferrara with elegance and composure, the memories of her earlier life were never far. The scandals that had pursued her from the courts of Rome followed in quiet, insistent whispers. The accusations of incest with her brother, though likely exaggerated by political enemies, never entirely faded. The rumours that she had been complicit in the murders of her husband Alfonso of Aragon or other political rivals, even if untrue, had cemented themselves into the public imagination. Each rumour was like a shadow she could not escape, a stain on the narrative of her life that no act of virtue could entirely erase. And yet she endured. She endured the judgment of history, the betrayal of family, the pain of miscarriages, and the deaths of her children, all while cultivating a court that became a beacon of refinement and intellect. In Ferrara, Lucrezia's life took on a rhythm markedly different from the chaos of Rome. Here, she was not a pawn to be bartered or a tool of her father's power. She was a duchess in her own right, the wife of Alfonso d'Este, a man who saw her not as a symbol but as a partner. Their marriage, though born from political necessity, blossomed into something more substantial than the alliances she had known in her youth. Alfonso provided her with a stability that had been absent in her earlier marriages. He did not parade her as an instrument of power, nor did he seek to control her every movement. In Ferrara, Lucrezia found a measure of autonomy, a sense of agency that had been denied her in the gilded cages of her Roman upbringing. She curated a court that reflected her tastes and intellect, surrounding herself with poets, musicians, scholars, and artists. The halls of the Este Palace echoed with music and learning, and under her patronage, Ferrara became a centre of cultural brilliance, rivaling even the most celebrated cities of Renaissance Italy. Despite this newfound stability, the tragedies of her life continued to punctuate her years with sorrow. Miscarriages haunted her, cutting short the lives of children who might have been the carriers of her legacy. Infants died before they could take their first steps, leaving her to mourn alone, often in the privacy of her chambers. These personal losses, though deeply private, were inseparable from her public role. A duchess could not visibly grieve in a way that suggested weakness. She had to maintain her poise, her composure, her image. Each loss deepened her understanding of the fragility of life, the capriciousness of fate, and the cruelty of a world in which a woman's worth could be measured as easily by her offspring as by her beauty or intelligence. In this duality, she became a figure both human and legendary, embodying the contradictions of Renaissance womanhood. Strength intertwined with vulnerability, power shadowed by suffering, refinement shaped by hardship. The memory of her father, Pope Alexander VI, loomed large in her reflections. Rodrigo Borgia had been a man of extraordinary vision and extraordinary vice, whose ambition had reshaped the political landscape of Italy. His papacy had been a blend of dazzling cultural patronage and ruthless political maneuvering. He had installed his children in positions of power, flaunted his wealth and influence, and left behind a legacy as scandalous as it was formidable. Lucrezia's relationship with him was complex. She had been both a favoured daughter and a political instrument, celebrated for her beauty while manoeuvred through marriages that served her father's strategic interests. The image of Rodrigo, bloated and blackened at the time of his death, a grotesque smile frozen on his lips, was a reminder of the cost of ambition, of power pursued without restraint, and of the familial bonds that could both sustain and destroy. Cesare Borgia, her brother, was another figure whose presence continued to echo in her life. History often painted their relationship in lurid shades, suggesting a closeness that transcended familial affection, hinting at impropriety and insinuating complicity in acts of murder and treachery. Yet these claims were as much the product of political enemies as of reality. Cesare was ruthless, ambitious, and unrelenting, a man who carved his path through Italy with a combination of strategy, violence, and charisma. Lucrezia's proximity to him meant that her life was inevitably caught in the crossfire of his campaigns. When towns fell, when rivals were eliminated, when power shifted, she was implicated by association, accused of being a silent accomplice to deeds she may never have orchestrated. Her identity, in the eyes of many, was inseparable from the deeds of her brother, and yet in Ferrara she was learning to define herself on her own terms, apart from the shadow of Cesare's ambition. The question of her mysterious child, born under murky circumstances in 1501, added another layer of intrigue and ambiguity to her story. The papal bulls that named two different fathers, one claiming the child as Alexander's, the other as Cesare's, left the truth obscured, the child's identity a subject of endless speculation. Lucrezia acknowledged him as her half-brother, an explanation that satisfied no one and only fueled further rumours. The boy grew up with the title of Duke of Nepi, navigating a world in which legitimacy and illegitimacy intertwined, and his very existence became a testament to the complicated web of Borgia scandals. Whether he was her own son, hidden beneath layers of deception, or truly the child of her father or brother, remains unknown. What survives is the uncertainty itself, the persistent murmur of questions that history never answers. Even in Ferrara, where she attempted to cultivate a life of relative peace and influence, the public perception of her could not be fully escaped. Chroniclers, poets, and ambassadors continued to recount tales of her supposed vices, of the poison she allegedly administered, of the manipulations she was said to have orchestrated. Yet alongside these stories were records of her patronage, her generosity, her intellect, and her compassion. She became a figure of dualities, at once vilified and revered, condemned and celebrated, a woman whose life could be interpreted in 1,000 different ways depending on the teller. Her image was a canvas upon which others projected their fears, their obsessions, and their moral judgments. Lucrezia's endurance was remarkable. She survived political upheavals, family betrayals, personal tragedies, and the relentless scrutiny of a society that delighted in scandal. Unlike her brother, whose life ended violently on the battlefield, or her father, whose ambitions left him rotting in disgrace, Lucrezia lived to see the passage of time reshape her legacy. The woman who had been accused of turning the Vatican into a brothel, who had been whispered about in corridors of power, who had been painted as a poisoner and seductress, now stood as a duchess whose life embodied refinement, culture, and resilience. She witnessed how history chose which aspects of her story to preserve, how certain narratives were amplified while others were erased. Her court in Ferrara became a testament to her intellect and taste. She supported artists, musicians, and scholars, turning her residence into a hub of Renaissance culture. The poetry read in her chambers, the music performed in her halls, and the intellectual discussions she hosted all reflected a woman who understood the power of culture as a form of influence. She transformed the spaces she inhabited, leaving an imprint that was both tangible and enduring. Patrons and visitors alike noted her ability to elevate the arts, to nurture talent, and to engage with ideas far beyond the narrow confines of the political intrigue that had defined her earlier years. Yet, even as she fostered beauty and learning, personal grief remained a constant companion. The loss of children, the deaths of close family members, and the betrayals she had endured created a quiet sorrow beneath her composed exterior. Letters, diaries, and contemporary accounts reveal glimpses of a woman who felt deeply, who mourned privately, and who understood the impermanence of life. Her resilience was not the absence of pain, but the capacity to continue despite it, to carry forward with dignity, to navigate a world that demanded both strength and appearance. The contradictions in Lucrezia's life, the sinner and the saint, the victim and the manipulator, the daughter of scandal and the duchess of refinement, make her story particularly compelling. Each retelling selects a fragment of her existence, emphasizing one truth while obscuring another. Some narratives highlight her alleged complicity in her father's and brother's schemes. Others celebrate her cultural contributions and her role as a mother and hostess. Neither is wholly accurate, for the fullness of her life cannot be captured in simple categories. She existed in the liminal space between myth and reality, a figure whose complexity defies easy judgment. Her death, when it came, marked the end of an era. She left behind a legacy that was intertwined with the grandeur and depravity of Renaissance Italy, a life that bore witness to the heights of power and the depths of human suffering. Historians would continue to debate her character, poets would continue to marvel at her beauty, and storytellers would continue to be fascinated by the scandals that surrounded her. Lucrezia Borgia's life became a mirror of the times she inhabited, reflecting both their brilliance and their corruption, their elegance and their cruelty. She was a woman of her era, yet she also transcended it, becoming a symbol of the enduring allure of history's mysteries. What remains most remarkable about Lucrezia is not the certainty of her actions but the resilience of her existence. In a world dominated by men whose power was often exercised through violence and coercion, she carved out a space in which she could exercise influence, foster culture, and preserve her dignity. Her life reminds us that history is rarely simple, that the stories passed down through generations are often filtered through lenses of fascination, fear, and moral judgment. She was more than the scandals, more than the gossip, more than the accusations. She was a woman who endured, who adapted, who survived. Lucrezia Borgia, the daughter of a pope, the sister of a conqueror, the widow of murdered husbands, and the mother of children both lost and survived, became a figure larger than life, both in her time and for centuries to follow. Her story challenges us to consider the ways in which history is written, the ways in which myths are constructed, and the ways in which individuals navigate the intersections of power, gender, and society. She was both a product of her time and an agent within it, a figure whose complexity defies easy classification, and a woman whose life continues to captivate, puzzle, and inspire. In the end, Lucrezia Borgia's life is a testament to the enduring power of myth and the human fascination with scandal and intrigue. She was a duchess, a mother, a patron, a victim, a villain, and a survivor. Each label tells only a part of her story. The fullness of her existence lies in the contradictions, the tragedies, the triumphs, and the mysteries that surrounded her. She reminds us that history is not merely a record of facts, but a tapestry of perceptions, interpretations, and narratives, each shaped by the storyteller. In this way, Lucrezia's life and the myths that grew around it remain alive, compelling us to look deeper, question more, and acknowledge the complexity of the human experience. Her story ends not with a final act of drama or scandal, but with the quiet endurance of a life lived under the weight of impossible expectations, political intrigue, and personal loss. Lucrezia Borgia remains, in memory and in myth, a symbol of the contradictions of Renaissance Italy. Beauty intertwined with brutality, power intertwined with vulnerability, and history intertwined with legend. She was a woman shaped by her times, yet she also shaped them, leaving a legacy that continues to fascinate and challenge, reminding us that the truth of a life is often inseparable from the stories told about it, and that sometimes the most enduring power lies not in the deeds themselves, but in the myth they leave behind.